Hey, welcome. I'm Dwayne.
And I'm Jennifer, and this is the Dwayne and Jennifer
podcast. Come on, church. Hey, excited. We have Jono Hall with us, former staff member of IHOPKC, former leader, ended with being him COO. We had a lively conversation, and I think it's going to be a helpful conversation for many of you. So do your best and stick around. Hey. Wow, this is going to be a fun conversation, I think, Jono.
Hopefully. I'm not aware of the questions you're going to ask me, so hopefully
I know.
It's not going to be too hard.
That's part of the fun of it, Jono.
We're putting you in the hot seat today, bro.
I'm ready.
Just give us a little bit of your timeline, and then even just, some of your functions and kind of roles in IHOP.
Yeah, I mean, I am British. I came to Grace Training Center in my gap between high school and university, so that was my first introduction to Kansas City. I would sit at the back of Sam Storm's class with Joel Richardson and make fun of Sam, so that was fun.
Wow.
And then went back to England, did my degree, worked for God TV for 4 years in their very early years, getting them up and running on lots of different satellites, cables and stuff. And then moved back to Kansas City in 2003 and had lots of hats through the years. But the main thing I did was get the media off the ground at IHOP for about 10 years. And then the last 3-4 years, I was the chief operating officer at IHOP.
And then, so when did you leave?
So I left in 2018. Yeah.
So now you live in Colorado Springs, and I know that currently you have 11 doodles in your house because Sherry, your wife, has a doodle business, right?
Sherry has a golden doodle business, and she's also the president of the Golden Doodle Association of North America, which makes me the first gentleman of
Yes,
doodles.
it does.
So, yeah.
And so you also work with Sardius, is that right? Or what else do you do currently?
Yeah, so I help out a lot of people with media. That's my day job. Building apps and doing big events and broadcasting. That's kind of what I do when I'm not listening to abuse victims and witnesses, which is what I've been doing a lot this last year. But
right.
That's my day job, helping people out with media, workflows, encoders, streaming, big events, that kind of thing.
That's awesome.
So just kind of as our first question, speak to what was kind of the final straw, if you will, or one of the final straws in regards to you stepping away. We'll start there and then we'll kind of...
Stepping away from IHOP.
Stepping away from IHOP, yeah.
Yeah, I think there were a number of different warning signs for me through, I became chief operating officer. There was really kind of a number of month kind of transition in at the end of 2014, officially kind of took up the role in March 2015. And a number of warning signs in relationship to lack of transparency or learning. But it really was the Brad Tebbutt situation in 2018 that was kind of a final straw. I was kind of like somewhat done at that point, but yet it was this kind of disagreement with Mike over how to deal with Brad. I got a phone call from the Modesto B in February 2018. I'm probably getting the dates a little bit wrong. I could probably find them exactly, but wanted to know about what our comment was on this situation. called Brad in immediately the next morning, got his side of the story, basically went down my normal pattern of what I would typically do if somebody's being had an allegation of that severity. I was like, putting somebody on administrative leave is the normal thing to do. And so I just got a massive pushback from Mike on that we weren't standing with him. Kind of shouted down in private, like, this is your first rodeo. And I was like, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Right. It's not my first rodeo in dealing with sexual sin. But if he meant it was my first rodeo covering something up, it certainly was, and it wasn't going to be my first rodeo. And then, shouted out in front of the executive leadership team. Mike was like, he didn't want me standing with him in his hour of need. I went back to him. I was like, that was out of order, which he apologized for his tone. He didn't apologize for his position. And I think it was only then when the newspaper article came out that there was such a pressure from so many people that it was at that point that he got put on administrative leave. And when one of the newspaper articles had Jennifer Roach say, you should call in Grace, I thought it's a great idea. Why would we not do that? Right. But I wasn't exactly in Mike's good graces at that point. And I think even at that point, before we even called in Grace, I'd had a call from Colorado. Can I come out and join a leadership team of an organization out here? So I was kind of already on my way out at that point.
Okay. And so Mike's resistance, did you see it as just his kind of unsanctified definition of mercy, or did you suspect anything at that point?
No, I didn't. I didn't suspect anything with Mike, although that was very strange. I was like, I felt pushed into a corner. Yeah. I was like, this is just what a responsible leader does, and you're saying not to do that. So then I'm like, all my sensibilities are like, I don't know how to act in this position because that's going to be what I do. Right. There's no coaching that you can tell me to kind of look away when bad things happen. That isn't going to happen. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I did think it was a difference of ministry approach. I knew of Mike's mercy, but at that point, I think I changed my position. There was quite a lot of, as you know, there was quite a lot of broken middle management at IHOP through the years who hurt people under them. And Mike would have mercy on that middle management. And I was like, let's look at the big picture of all of the people. And is there no mercy for the people that middle manager is hurting? Right. Number one. And number two, is there no mercy for the middle manager? Because the middle manager is, in my opinion, heaping up judgment for themselves by abusing people. Wow. I mean, right. So there's a redefinition of words in my mind through the years. I mean, even as this thing came out, I was reminded of a relational meeting we had with a number of leaders up at Shiloh. I don't know if you were there, but one of the Bickle family talked about that definition of loyalty, of going to prison for something that they hadn't done. That's what loyalty meant. And I came out of that thinking, that's super weird, number one. Number two, it's not a biblical definition of loyalty. Three, it's a hood definition of loyalty. It's a criminal, like it's loyalty among mafia. And so in thinking about this, of the Bickle family standing up for Mike, I was like, are they going to stand for truth or loyalty? And then I was like, actually, this is a wrong... a lot of Mike family know what Mike did, but the question is they're loyal to Mike. So therefore, they're never going to admit that. They're going to attack other people. but the reality of loyalty that I've come to discover is looking at it from an eternal perspective. I'm convinced Mike is done a lot of bad things, sexual predation over the past 40 years. And I think being loyal to Mike, and even as I guarantee there's some family watching this, and I would say this, that loyalty to Mike is thinking about Mike in the coming 10, 20 years, because guess what? He's going to be standing before Jesus then, as we all do. Guess what? We all die when we're 70, 80, 90, was it? We all have 70 years, and if we're lucky, we get 80. But Mike's going to be standing before Jesus. And I think loyalty to Mike is saying, Mike, how can you stand before Jesus with, I don't know, any degree of righteousness? Or do you just want to hide all of those things and stand before Jesus with all of those hidden sins? That, guess what? When you're standing before Jesus, they're not hidden anymore. Jesus sees everything. So I think loyalty to Mike is that he needs to face those sins. And mercy in the whole situation. Let's have mercy towards the people that have been abused. That's the picture of those that stand with the Lord. They're standing with the downtrodden, those that are abused, and that's where I want to be.
Yeah, it's really good.
So when did you, little timeline, we'll probably jump around a little bit, but when did you first go, oh my goodness, something's wrong here with Mike? Like, because I'm not talking like leadership or dysfunction in IHOP. I'm talking, when did you first go, he's had sexual brokenness here, and I think he's a predator, or there's predatorial behavior there?
I think obviously I was walking with one of the families that broke apart, and I think some of it's not secret. I'm trying to like navigate where do I say Jane Doe, where do I say the actual name of the people, but the girl that Luke Bickle had been having an affair with, that marriage had broken down, and then learning a little more about that relationship with Mike, and saying I think we saw that and we said that was weird, but we didn't question anything. And there wasn't any evidence. It was just weird that there was that. So I didn't dig any deeper. I think I wasn't. I say this because there's been a big narrative of a big conspiracy, Black Horse conspiracy against IHOP. And I always say that, you, Wes and Brian brought out your statement on October 28th. And I don't think I spoke to you. I hadn't spoken to you for maybe six months before that. And I don't think I spoke to you for probably another 2-3 weeks. I'm not sure when the exact date was. It might have been, it actually might have been when we first met with Boz, which would be in the middle of November, I think. So I wasn't. I wasn't looking. Anyway, somewhere around that. I mean, it might have been a few days earlier than that. But the issue is, when everything blew up, I mean that week, I think I'm asking the question, like, is this real? And there's kind of, I say it's emotional whiplash. And I think because of my prior position, people are calling up, starting to call us up. And I remember when Daniel Lim and I was on a text over Daniel and Francis, and I'm like, I'm going to dig because I think things are going to disappear, of which they subsequently did. And I'm looking at a number of different stories, some which haven't come out in the public even yet. I was digging deeper and saying, is this true? Is this person telling the truth? And I used to do prison ministry, and you'd talk to prisoners. Everybody in prison is innocent, and you'd be like, I'm going to ask him one a list of questions one day, I'm going to ask them the same list of questions the second day, and you'd find the discrepancies and you realize that they're lying. But doing that with a number of different people, like, are they telling the truth? And it was like everything held water, and it's just like, okay, they're not lying. So now my picture of Mike has to change. This person I thought that I knew had this very dark, deep other side. It's really, I'm finding it really hard because I'm like, if we were on a normal call, I'll be like just saying the names of everybody, but
right.
But yeah, I've just been going through these past few weeks just for the investigation, going through my timeline for the past year, and the various different people that I talked to, the various different people that called me up, and just a long list of witnesses and victims, and it's tragic, and then it's very tragic the way that the way that the response happened. The classic Darvo. I wasn't even familiar with that term, Darvo, and it's like, wow, this is playing out exactly how we, that first meeting we had with Bosnia was like, this is how it plays out. What did he say? He says, you're evangelicals. He says, we like us and them. He says, you think that you're us. He says, you're now them. And that was exactly how it played out. Nearly every communication. I was just going, Eric Volt's 6 weeks tenure. Nearly every kind of communication that came out, it wasn't about, he said, we want truth, but nearly everything was like scoring points about, we're not going to go with Stinson LLP now because of a social media posts connected to the advocate group, when in reality, Shane just told me, well, they'd already decided they weren't going to go with Stinson LLP anyway. They were just using that as a kind of as a cover to gain an extra point to hit the advocacy group. Was it the complaint group at that time?
Yeah, it was a complaint group then.
And it's just like, oh goodness.
It is.
Well, that would
crazy.
be one of the questions I have is, like, we originally got called the complaint group, and there was this place where we kind of came together. There was Alan and you jumped in, and Wes Martin's really stayed, and Elizabeth. And so we were first called the complaint group, and then Shane actually said, what are you guys doing here? And so now we see it as a ploy to actually discredit any type of voice we had. Then they changed it to the advocate group, and you have all along even resisted that title. So why have you done what you've done? Why have you stayed in this and just labored like hundreds of hours to bring forth the truth? Because you've kind of resisted even that title, advocate. What's been the motivation for you?
Well, number one, I'll say why I resisted advocate. I resisted this narrative that was being propagated, because I heard it behind the scenes, and then you saw it in public presentations of a conspiracy. I was like, there is no conspiracy. There is no organized group. All there is former leaders that are trying to be responsible. And I think you guys maybe know me well enough to know I've got this maybe overdeveloped sense of responsibility. If I just tweet, I just saw this. There's a report out today about Gateway, and I was just saying I haven't really followed Gateway too much, but of course you see it on the social media streams, and they just got rid of 4 elders.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to get the exact phraseology, but basically they're saying these guys knew about it enough that they should have asked questions. And I think we were conditioned at IHOP into this kind of mercy, just mercy. And number one, and number two, if you're not in the circle, then butt out, because it needs to be a real small circle. People don't need to know about everybody's sin. Like, we need to cover it up. We need to be merciful. But Gateway, they said, hey, these four guys, they knew about stuff enough that they should have asked questions more, and they didn't, and we don't want them
Yeah.
on the team anymore. And I think I I feel that.
Yeah.
And you always use this analogy. If I hear a kid being abused in my basement and I don't go down to look, I think I have got complicity
Yeah.
in that. And I want to do what's right. And that's what a shepherd does.
Yeah.
A shepherd maybe hears the wolf in the distance. He walks around, he checks the flock, he sees, oh, there's some wolf teeth mark on this sheep. Okay, I'm going to dig a little deeper because there must be a
Yeah.
wolf around here somewhere. I think that's what a shepherd does to protect the flock.
Yeah.
And I think that's what brought me back in.
Yeah.
I mean, Daniel was like, "Yeah, dig, like you're good at this kind of thing," and I'm like, "Okay, well, I'm gonna dig in it." I'm gonna dig because something's rotten in the state of Denmark, and we need to find out what it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, for
Oh,
sure.
I mean, I didn't know that Daniel told you that. That's interesting to me.
I think the point you brought up about the role of a shepherd is critical, but it's a concept that was never really championed within the IHOP culture. People never thought of themselves as shepherds. They thought of themselves as individuals who bought into a big mission and kind of like, oh, well, that's not in my lane. Something happening to someone that's not in my lane. And so I have gone through my history at IHOP, remembering different situations and scenarios, and now feeling the grief of the fact that I didn't act like a shepherd. When I heard negative things that people had endured, I either thought, ooh, glad it's not me, or warned my close friends to avoid that person. Instead, I should have gone to that person and helped. I should have helped. I should have gotten involved. And I have
Mm-hmm.
deep regret over the lack of being a shepherd in IHOP. And I shouldn't have known that the youth, for example, were being belittled, ridiculed when they would stand up and ask a question by a particular leader. I think many people knew that side of that particular leader, and it was just like, oh, yeah, that's him. He's arrogant. And now I'm like, there was a parent that was entrusting their children to our care. And it may not have been directly in my downline, but shame on me that I didn't do something about it. And so I'm feeling that more and more. And so I appreciate your response. And I appreciate that's just how you think. And I think part of it, you're a trained lawyer and you were raised in a pastor's home. And those two things go together very well, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I guarantee. And even yesterday, I was asking somebody as I was trying to remember things. Um, some massive dysfunction
Yeah.
in a different department, and I didn't get involved back then. I wasn't in a position of doing anything really about it. But you'd
Right.
hear things on the grapevine.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, I'm just gonna put my head down sometimes. And then I think when I became chief operating officer, I'm like, it was in a season of like, hey, we need organizational health. I did a review. I think I interviewed about 80 leaders, and then did a review of all of our dysfunctions as an organization, and then we'd do three or four recommendations. Mike read it for a day, and then he came back. He was like, "Nobody can see this, not even the ELT. You need to change it that we remove the dysfunctions and just have the recommendations." And I think
Yeah.
that combined with, I was always a big kind of fanboy of Patrick Lencioni, and we had one of his guys come, and it was like, oh, Patrick could maybe come, and Mike was just so resistant. It was quite interesting reading Bob Scott's book about. I don't know if you've read that, but
Yeah.
Mike's resistance to kind of personality tests. I can't
Yeah.
be boxed. I'm different than anybody, and it's a case of yeah. I don't know if I'm that caring. I'm a bit of a cold fish. Sorry, my dogs are fighting in the background here. Um, but but if it's responsibility, if this is your role, you're a shepherd, you have to look after the people, and I'm gonna try and do that as best as I can, and I'm sure I don't do a very good job, but yeah, it's and if isn't this love one another? Isn't that what we do?
Right, right.
Totally. And I'm gonna speak to your point, Jennifer. And this is something I think all of us are opening our eyes to. If you would have stepped into somebody else's lane, you would have got chewed up.
Yeah, it's very true.
We also got to be like,
Yeah.
if I would have stepped into that lane,
Oh, yeah.
man, I would have got. And so there is that also where, for a majority of my time, I did my best to look after and
Yeah.
those things. I was responsible for keep them healthy, I absolutely made mistakes in my leadership there, but I think that there were those that, hey, and I'm going to do my best with what I've been given, and I think then that document, when did you make that document? When did you do that? Because I remember, we had left already, but I'm guessing that was part of your journey of going, this is never going to change. And there's things
Right.
here,
Right. No, and I said that to Sherry. I was like, I don't think I can be successful at this role.
Yeah.
Right at the very beginning, because Mike said, "Oh, nobody can see it because it might be used by our enemies against us." And I'm like, what does that even mean? I'm like, I've talked to AD leaders and I've come up with an assessment. Who's to say my assessment is correct? But I'm like, that's like if you just have the recommendations, it's like you're a doctor and it's like, take this drug, and this drug. And then number 2, take this drug, and this drug. And then you were like, well, why are we taking it? What are we trying to cure?
Right.
And it's like,
right.
I would prefer to go, here's the problem. Let's all look at the problem together and go, well, if that's the problem we're trying to solve, Jono, your recommendation's dumb. Like, let's try something else. And I'm like, hey, that's a better answer. Let's go with it. So yeah, but there was obviously a big resistance of any kind of transparency, which is obviously clear now.
Right. So through all of this, you've heard countless stories of sexual abuse, spiritual abuse, all of that. What is there something you've learned that you didn't know before?
I mean, over this past year, there's lots of things. I mean, I just mentioned Darvo.
Yeah.
Of course, you recognize it.
Looking back, do you see grooming tactics that you didn't see before, knowing what you know now?
There's certain things, yeah, and I'm trying to bring to mind. There's lots of reflections that you have that at the time, I think there's things that you think, oh, that's weird, but that's none of my business. So that's
Right.
and I'm a pretty laissez-faire guy anyway. So I'm like, live and let live. Like I always hated the heresy hunter type people, or the
Right.
like, hey, as the prophetic history or the way that people did things, I'm like, I'm not going to do that. But if you want to do that, I'm not going to. Like the sacred trust, for instance, I had big issues with the sacred trust and the oath before God. I was like, aren't we supposed to let our yes be yes and our no be no? So I used to just say to the media department, hey, this is simply a job requirement that you have. In any job, you have job requirements that you've got to be in certain places, and this is part of the job requirement. So that's how I interpreted it. But looking back now, you're like, actually, there's a number of those things which, the prophetic history, I think did manipulate people, and I would look at people who had gone kind of prophetic, gone crazy, and it's just like, oh, I guess it's their choice. They can do that. I'm not going to be like that.
Right.
But you learn as you look back, and you think, oh, no, that was used as a tool of manipulation, and that was wrong. And I didn't recognize it at the time. And then you're like, to what degree do I have complicity in that? If you didn't see that, I don't know.
Right.
Part of the issue of the system was, there was a lot of freedom in lots of ways.
Yeah.
I pushed back against a lot of the prophetic craziness. In the school I was teaching basic Christian beliefs, church history, Old Testament survey, Pauline epistles, basic meat and potato Christianity. And then when you would present lots of things, people would go, no, we need all that. We absolutely need all of that. And so it's like, okay, well, you agree, I agree. Let's keep moving forward. But I didn't necessarily, well, apart from certain teachers, you'd look over the fence and go, well, that's kind of crazy what they're teaching. And then you'd be like, go to Alan and be like, hey, what is going on here?
Right. That's a really good point.
So you almost from the beginning, when we began just to, okay, how are we going to bring forth the light here? We're a proponent, for going to the public press. And often I was on the other side, no, let's give them a chance. And so I think probably you and I probably had a healthy tension of just trying to navigate this. But what did you see in IHOP? But I think it's also just in the church. What did you see that said it's sad, but it is our reality? We have to go to the public media with this story.
I think a few things. I think I had that meeting with we had that meeting with Boz middle of November, and he basically filled us in. This is how it goes, and I was like, okay, he's seen a thing or two. Number one, but number two, I have served over the last few years. Like I was doing a Ravi Zacharias event when that whole thing blew up. During the event, that's when it came out. Like helped out Hillsong, Willow Creek. I'm trying to think of others, but so helping out Willow Creek, friends with one of the main whistleblowers, hearing it from all different sides, and realizing the Willow Creek situation was very, very similar. And it seemed like we're going down a very similar trajectory here. If it had not been for the Chicago Tribune, everything with Bill Hybels would have been swept under the rug.
Yeah.
I could very much see everything with this whole IHOP Mike situation being swept under the rug. That was a real possibility. And so
it was like it was a real possibility, and I think we just need to recognize that it was a real possibility.
So I think my normal proclivity would not be to answer the calls, and as I look back at the timeline, we didn't actually. The first number of weeks, Kansas City Star are calling. Oh, Roy's Report are calling. Should we talk to them? No, let's not. Let's not talk.
Yeah.
Who should? Oh, they've called up Weston. They've called up Dwayne. They've called up whoever. And I think actually it was one of the early witnesses, a big witness that I was talking to, and I was like, actually, he is getting threatening text messages, like verbal stuff, text stuff. Even I was like more getting into more threatening on his physical person, and I was like, there is a chance that this guy he's putting up with it at this moment, but he could just be like, I'm done. I can't deal with being threatened this much. And I was like, I think there's maybe two answers to this. One, we get an affidavit from him, or two, he speaks to a journalist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that was the first kind of extended interview that that took place, and that really took place in the same time frame as talking with Boz. And I remember there was lots of different opinions about who we should talk to, where, like, what's the media strategy, and I'm like, oh, I can't even believe we're even talking like this.
Right.
But it's like, no, if we're gonna get it out there, social media was like absolutely insane. Of which I remember when getting on a call with General Fuller, and he thought that I was behind organizing all of that. I mean, it's like social media is like everybody and his mother with all different types of agendas. I mean, lots of hurt obviously out there.
Right.
Like, for goodness sake, I'm not organizing any of it, let alone all of it.
Right.
So yeah, I think that it was at that point that I was like, okay, I'm not gonna not answer the phone. I'm gonna answer the phone. In fact, I'm gonna, if things happen, if statements happen, I'm gonna call them up and go, hey, this is coming out, or just an open dialogue with a number of different journalists.
Yeah. I remember when Dwayne did the local news piece here in Kansas City, and just the feeling of vulnerability, of saying out loud and knowing that we were sealing our fate relationally, our reputation, everything, but knowing it was the right thing to do, but the tension that we felt in that moment was a lot.
Absolutely. No, it's wary convictions, and then do you have boldness? It's like, it's always been my prayer, Lord, give me wisdom, and then give me courage. Give me wisdom to know what is right, and then the courage to actually do it.
Yeah.
And it's hard because it feels like talking about that IHOP definition of loyalty. It feels like, oh, I'm being disloyal, I'm betraying.
Yes.
And I'm like, no, actually, like, I want to be friends with everybody, to be honest. Like even if you're talking smack, like, let's okay, talk smack about me, but let's talk together.
Yeah.
Let's figure out what your issues are, and let's move forward. And if you've been abusing people, let's try and deal with that. Like, and there's consequences for that. But hey, I want you to stand before Jesus righteously. So it doesn't matter. But I'm also aware, I was just talking to, I don't know if you know this name, Jared Anderson, the other day. He was in the coffee shop I go to, and he was talking about how the fact of Ed Gunga, his wife, was abused as a babysitter by Ed, and then very soon after, he was in the Desperation Band under Ted Hagen. He goes, Ed and Ted were the same person. But it's true of nearly all. Not nearly all, but there's a lot of people in that layer of kind of leadership of the church in North America where it's the same person. The same, we're trying to preserve an institution.
Yes.
We're doing this for Jesus. We're doing this for the gospel. We're doing this for our right-wing politics. I mean, maybe it's a bit controversial today, but it's like, hey, are you going to toe the line? Are you going to be loyal to these things? And it's like, I don't care so much about those institutions or those things. Are we going to be loyal to Jesus? Right. And yeah, I
mean, that would be one of the biggest things that kind of, for me, is really, my eyes have been open, is to the loyalty, and I wouldn't have called it loyalty, but I would have called it commitment to the vision and commitment to what I've said yes to help build, and how that has been so played, where the Bible and the ministry name and vision are almost the same thing. And I've been really sobered by that. because it's not. And you get a narcissist leading something that has the ability to communicate. And then also when you got a band that can manipulate, a leader that can, it's a swirl, man. And to open up our eyes and go, our leadership structures have facilitated
Yes.
predatory leaders, and we've got some sober conversation to wake up and to chart a different course. And one of the questions, like, I got two questions here, but first question, I think when you lean into, you humble yourself and you walk with, a heart of search me and know me. I believe that God is a redemptive God. And what are you kind of aiming for, praying for, desiring for redemption out of all of, the history of IHOP? And what would you love to see the Lord do? What does redemption look like?
I don't know. I mean, hopefully there's some restored relationships. I'm hoping that. I'm hoping there is some ability to face truth and deal with it. I think one of the things, I help out a lot of different ministries and see. I was just at the Lausanne conference in Korea. That was the evangelical side of the church. I deal with Pentecostals and Anglicans and evangelicals and all across the denominational, and everyone's dealing with similar issues. But I think it's very easy to critique. It's very easy to be a critic and see everything that's wrong with the church. I'd love to see new models of church life created. You only change culture through creating new culture. You actually, I'm not by nature an iconoclast. But sometimes in the midst of creating new culture, you need to tear down the old. If you're gonna re-wallpaper a room, well, I guess you don't have to. You could just wallpaper over it, but then you're left with the old stuff that's festering there. Like if you're gonna, let's use another analogy. If you're gonna clean a wound, you need to take out the dirt.
Yeah,
and
100%.
then you
Yep.
then you need to bandage it afterwards. But yeah, I would love to see new models in the church, because I think IHOP's one situation, but we've seen a year of exposure throughout all different churches and places, and it's like, what's our ecclesiology?
Right.
Are we going to stand up and defend it to the hilt? I think we saw a lot of people standing up and defending IHOP and looking at it like it's me too, and we're allowing the world into the church. I'm like, no, grow up.
Yeah.
Let's defend the weak in our midst. Let's be like Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm going to follow up with my second question. You labored just intensely for an investigation, and we're kind of, I don't even know, 3/4 of the way through. We just got a little, but what is your hope with that investigation? And then also, what is not going to happen, like where people might have an expectation, but that's probably not going to be the outcome of, so kind of both sides of what's the impact of the investigation?
yeah, I think an independent investigation is a weak tool, but it's still a tool. It's not a criminal investigation. There's no subpoena power. There's no grabbing all of the emails, which may have been helpful, I feel, if that was possible.
Oh my God! Yes.
So all that you're left with is prima facie evidence, eyewitness testimony, which let's be clear, because this was an early thing. they're like, oh, it's just people's stories. I'm like, for all of history in every legal system, first person with eyewitness testimony is the first type of evidence that you have. Eyewitness testimony is evidence.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a weak tool. I think it brings a little bit of exposure. I hear, Tammy saying, I think she'd like to see Mike in an orange jumpsuit. And I think that's definitely a fair feeling. If there's no repentance, that like if somebody has sexually abused you, not only they're not saying sorry, but they're denying anything's ever happened. I can understand the anger that causes, but it's a weak tool. I think people continue with their lives. Mike will never have the same influence if he continues to have a home Bible study. I think we both hear Mike always planning his comeback. He's gonna have vindication. He's gonna have redemption. He's gonna have all of this stuff. And I'm like, I don't know what you're thinking when you say that. Do you think you've got vindication before God? Is that what you're thinking, or is it just before man, and that's all that matters? But so I think there's going to be a degree of exposure through the investigation, but that's about it. And it's a narrow scope as well. And I know everybody's mad about that. Not everybody, but there's a lot of like, we're mad that it doesn't cover spiritual abuse. Let's just say that. Right. And I think that's definitely a fair point. I think spiritual abuse is really hard to define. It's one thing. Yeah. I mean, we were like going back and forth with the definition of sexual abuse. Like I remember, like Dwayne, when you and I met with Eric Volz that time, I was like trying to press him. I'm like, what's your definition of sexual abuse? And it was like, seemed like he was using a very, very narrow definition, unwanted sexual touch. And he kind of used some gross language, if I recall, but it's larger than that. And we know as we talk to people that have been groomed, and I'm like, that's weird. There was no unwanted sexual touch. And then even like in the case of lots of women, they're like, well, no, this was a consensual relationship. This was something that happened that I think I consented to. And that's a really difficult thing to kind of to dive into. But then when you overlay the clergy abuse on top of it, it's a clergyman who has a duty of care over younger women in his care, and you did that sexually, like it's cut and dried. This is not like some affair. This is actually an abuse of power, just plain and simple. So yeah. It's only about sexual stuff, which is unfortunate, but it's going to also incorporate the culture around that, which can cover that up. So that's helpful. But spiritual abuse can open up a door to lots of different things, which I think need to be looked into. Some do, and probably some don't as well. There's like this. Sure. Dwayne was mad at me one day in that spiritual abuse, and it's like, well, I don't know. Right.
It's a very subjective concept, so it's difficult to define it, and it's difficult to execute justice with it. It is real and it exists for sure. And I think there was tons of spiritual abuse in the IHOP culture, tons and tons of it, but really hard to take it all in. I mean, we'd be doing an investigation for years if we hit that point.
But also for those that are listening, there is a place where, yes, spiritual abuse happened there.
Yes.
And the part that I want a validation for people's experience.
Yes.
And instead of gaslighting their own soul, that whole thing. Because for me, I think the investigation, I think it is going to, specifically to the true victims, this, because I hear what you're saying, Jono, but it's also, I think, going to bring validation to what they did experience. No, this was real and it was evil. That's helpful, and you know, and you and I mean, you know that I've always wanted to look a documented statement on the internet, and this is what Boz said, and I, because there's things that I was like, no, Boz, I no, come on, man, and pretty much everything he said has been now come out to be the way the story wrote. But the
Yeah.
one thing I did hear in that first meeting, he did ask us, "What is your desired outcome?" And he told us about his own family member that he outed, and then he said, "Now I'm done." And that's what, you know,
Right.
I feel like if we can just get the truth out there from witnesses, get the stories clear,
Mm-hmm.
then it's almost up to the public. Look, it's there.
Mm-hmm.
Now you got to do what you want to do with it.
Yeah.
To a degree. Yeah.
I think I said on that first meeting, I was like, I want repentance, and if repentance doesn't happen, then exposure.
Yeah.
But moving on to the spiritual abuse side of things, you know, I was looking at the press release on December 10th or 11th. It was that IHOP had formed a Truth and Reconciliation Committee. They'd formed it. That's what the press release was. And I actually think about that because, you know, that came from that phraseology came from Desmond Tutu in South Africa, and then it was implemented to great effect in Rwanda, and obviously very serious, you know, genocide. That was that's what it's like. How do we not break apart this entire community? And so that's what they did. But like, hey, let's have it. I would love an open forum for people to come forward and say, hey, you did this to me, and like an ability for I know, like, in the early days, I remember on the Open Spaces Facebook forum, one, oh, I'm not going to say the name, but one person got on and they were like, and even Jono, I know he's part of the advocate group, but he was mean to me. And so I was like, hey, text her up. Let's go on a call. Like, I want to own,
Right.
if I was mean to you, if I was harsh, or if I want to own those things.
Yes.
I want to learn
Yes.
about me, about like, hey, when you get in this situation, this is how you act, and you're a douche. And I'm like, okay, good.
Yep.
Note to self. I need to change this about me.
Yes. Especially as it relates to people's spiritual growth. If people have roadblocks because of past pain and they can't seem to get over it, I want those roadblocks, and I'm part of it. I want that roadblock removed, because it's so complicated, all the dynamics of IHOP. But I mean, people's spiritual lives were enhanced for sure, but often the story is once they got out, they kind of nosedived and felt like they couldn't measure up anymore. And so we didn't give a holistic picture for what it looks like to follow Jesus. And so get out of the IHOP culture and you just feel like a lousy piece of crap. And so then people just recoil and feel condemned and like they're terrible Christians. That's an awful way to live. And and if the messaging, if the culture, if the intensity of that community played a part in someone being stunted in their growth, well, gosh, let's validate that pain and get them freed up so that they can go on in their journey. It's a mess. It's so complicated.
It's interesting. There's like this dichotomy. IHOP was presented in a similar way to Bethel, Toronto in the day, Morningstar. It's like this spiritual utopia.
Yeah.
This is like the city on a hill. So people look at it and they go, if only I can make it to that spiritual utopia, then my problems are going to be solved.
Yeah.
And so you have that, and then you have like so there's this expectation, and then Mike's continually preaching, well, weak and broken, and then mercy, mercy, mercy. And there's like this massive dichotomy between those two positions. And it's interesting. I mean, even thinking about certain parts of the prophetic history, I remember like saying to Mike one day, I suddenly was like, the way that you present some of this prophetic history is kind of like the march down Blue Ridge Boulevard. It's kind of weird. I'm like, you're not presenting something that's going to happen in the age to come. You've got a prophetic word about something in this age where somebody's pushing a wheelchair, no disease known to man. But it's Kansas City marching down Blue Ridge Boulevard. That means it's going to be hot. It's going to be boiling hot or freezing cold. Or you're going to have allergies. That's the 3 states of being in Kansas City. You're pushing down. It's like Dwayne and Jen walking down Blue Ridge Boulevard. They've just had an argument. They're feeling crap. The dude's been healed. But yeah, we're good. We're celebrating. But it's in this age, there's flies. It's like, that's what this, but it's presented as the utopia, as the ideal.
Yes.
And it's like, it ain't going to be like that. And Mike was like,
No.
yeah. I mean, it's a bit like, I remember like talking to Benji about Nefarious, because, that movie about sex trafficking, and I was helping, we reworked the whole thing and put that movie out. And I was like, Benji, do you think that we're going to get rid of sex trafficking in this age? And because that's why he was communicating. I'm like, it ain't going to happen.
Right.
Like, I'm telling you, it's not going to happen. And I was like, but that doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't right. And so I'd use the analogy of the starfishes on the beach. You know that analogy.
Yeah.
Like you're not going to save all these starfishes, but it mattered to that one. It mattered to that one. And that's what we're called to as believers.
Right.
We deal with people on a one-on-one basis, and it matters to people.
Yeah. It's been interesting, and maybe this is, it's slightly personal, but one thing that I'm coming back to now that I've been out of IHOP for coming on 12 years and have been through a deep season of reflection this last year is how simple the gospel is, but how complicated I made it. And realizing that I'm returning to the joy of my salvation again. And coming to Jesus who says, come to me when you're heavy laden and burdened and burned out on religion, and I'll give you rest. And that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. Just getting back to that simple place of devotion has been refreshing in a way that I can't even describe, and throwing off those old kind of burdens that I'd been carrying that I thought the Lord himself called me to, but it wasn't what he was calling me to. You know what I mean? So getting back in the simplicity of the word, reading the epistles again, reading what Paul says about live a quiet and peaceable life, work with your hands, kind of mind your own business, just how simple it is to be light in a dark world. It doesn't have to be this huge fanfare. It doesn't have to be on a platform. And it's like you said, it mattered to the one. You know what I mean? Just who's the one person in front of me? And I may not be part of something huge, but recognizing that being simple and faithful and steady is enough. And anyone can do that. There's no superstars anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Feels nice.
Yeah. No, I agree. I'm in a bad because I get to sit on the table with large churches, and I mean it's a conversation I have with Sherry all the time of like we're not called to a big grandiose vision. We don't have to do these things, and yet this is what I do for a job. I'm sitting at a table with X, whoever X is. Or, a month or so ago, I'm walking around Africa's largest slum, Kibera in Nairobi, and they're asking me for help for certain things. And I'm like, I have it in my power to make these lives better. Uh, anyway,
Yeah.
more and more these days, I'm saying I don't know, and I'm
Yeah.
still moving forward, but I'm like, I don't know the answers. Help, Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So you, I think, probably had a healthy, Jono, perspective on a lot of the prophetic history, meaning you didn't fully buy in, but it was a powerful tool to, in the midst of everything, that was a huge motivator to actually people, being committed even to the prayer room itself. But it was a powerful tool that Mike used. And just in a pastoral way, how do you help people navigate that tool that was used in that story? How, like, I bought in really hard, and now what do I do with the prophetic history?
Yeah, this is kind of a gross analogy, but I'll use it anyway. I kind of look at it like a bowl of ice cream with a dog dropping in it. Like, do you like how much of that do you want to eat? Is there true ice cream in that bowl? Yep, there's true ice cream in that
Right.
bowl. Are you eating that bowl of ice cream? Probably not today. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's definitely things that happened for sure in the 80s. Um, but the majority of the big stories, Mike was the principal storyteller. Mike was the
Right.
hero of the story. Mike gained the credibility because he had this spiritual
Mm-hmm.
experience that he was the
Mm-hmm.
spiritual leader. So it put him on a pedestal. And then he would then say, "No, but it belongs to you."
Right.
But nobody else's story was part of the prophetic history. It was just Mike's stories,
Yep.
really. And so therefore, I did my, uh, you know, I went around and interviewed Bob Jones and interviewed lots of different people. Um, but there were what was it that Bob Scott has Noel saying in his book, the shredder prophecies, that things that come and things that go.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I actually think Mike has proven himself to be untrustworthy in telling the truth, and therefore any story that he tells, I would say, has to be verified by
Yeah.
an external source, um, maybe one or two. Um, but even then, why go to that bother?
Right.
Um, he's proven himself to be a pathological liar. I don't do that with anybody else. I mean, I can tell you in prison, there's people saying some pretty fantastical stories, and I'm not going and trying to prove whether those stories are correct or not.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I don't know whether I don't know whether we need it or not. Well, I know what my answer is. We don't need it to
Mm-hmm.
be disciples of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
We really don't.
And I think that is just a huge piece of the journey that people, because the tension is there is actually part of it was true. And maybe even a lot of it was true in its seed form. And then Mike took and extrapolated a lots of story around. I know some of that stuff. And then some of what was put forward, Pat Bickle never walked. So you just kind of get rid of that part of the story, and so there was
Mm-hmm.
that whole journey. But it's a place where I actually care, because I do believe God speaks today, and so I don't want to throw it all out. But I also think we do have to really mature with the prophetic.
Throw it all out. You mean it being prophecy,
Yeah,
not the
sorry. Yeah.
Mike's prophetic history.
Yeah, sorry. Throw out the prophetic, because God speaks powerfully today. First and foremost, of course, through his word, but no, he speaks today, and I don't want us all to get lost in that storyline.
Right. Oh,
Yeah,
that's good.
no, I believe in prophecy. I mean, one of the things that drew me and kept me in Kansas City uh, was this, and it still remains true to this day for a lot of people I know. They're in their church back home and they feel a yearning for something more. They say, this church, the John Wimber, they're not doing this stuff. They don't value prayer. They don't value the place of Israel. I mean, we're sitting in an age where anti-Semitism is on the rise, and Israel has a massive part in God's heart. I actually hate the way that Israel is sometimes used as a magical charm by the North
Right.
American Evangelical Church. Like it's
Yes.
almost like a modern day indulgence. If you give a
Yeah.
dollar, you'll get a blessing back, and it's like,
Yeah.
hang on, Israel isn't a magical charm. They're just people, but it's like
Yep.
massively like foundational in the story of God, and yet on the liberal side of the church, we get like the massive anti-Semitism. I'm like, this is important to me. You know, living in New Testament Sermon on the Life, Sermon on the Mount lifestyle is important to me. Living a prayerful life is important to me. The Great Commission is important to me. Israel is, all of these values are important to me, and that's what kept me, because it was a community of people that thought the same. I mean, you probably don't remember this, but my first, I think we used to have staff meetings on a Saturday night. Was that right? In the early
Well, we had
days,
Saturday night meetings that
right?
only the staff attended. Like it
Yeah,
was
and
worship and
well, it
teaching
was,
and the whole bit.
yeah. I just remember being introduced as the new member of staff on the stage,
Yeah.
and I I can't remember who even announced me, but I remember like looking out and there's all you guys cheering, "Hey!" And like being a community of people of like mind who want
Hmm.
to be with you is super compelling.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and it was those relationships and those values that I think kept me through the years, not
Hmm.
necessarily. And I think there's a learning point for me here to know how people actually viewed the prophetic history, and it was manipulative.
Hmm.
In other things that I'm like, oh, I need to learn. Like I had a horrendous time through IHOP. I mean, you know some of this, Dwayne, but like fired
Yeah.
5 times, and then you would hear somebody's story of how badly they were treated, and I'm just like, my position was, hey, hold my beer, like
Right.
let
Right.
me
Right.
tell you my story. And I'm like looking back, going, that was dumb, Jono. Like, yeah,
Hmm.
just because you were like slashed and burnt so many times doesn't mean you shouldn't have. You need
Yeah.
to be able to listen to all these stories.
Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh.
yeah, there's just a lot of reflection and like, okay,
Yeah.
I did wrong. There's people who are smaller and weaker than your frame, or just let's not
Yeah.
use that. That's derogatory, but different in their frame. I'll just say different giftings,
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
parts of the body of Christ, and can you love them well with their skill set and their
Hmm.
different makeup of giftings?
Yeah. We created a context by which we patted each other on the back for being mistreated and then inspired one another to stay because we were part of a big narrative. And now it just seems so messed up that we all engaged like that. Like the ways I encourage people to stay when they should have left because you can get gold in the midst of this and all of that. There's always glimmer of truth in that. We do get refined by the fire, but sometimes it was simply dysfunctional leadership and maybe you should have ejected sooner. You know what I mean? But when you buy
Hmm.
into the bigger narrative that I'm a part of this global prayer that's ushering in the return of the Lord, man, I'll take a few hits and have some war stories so that I can be a part. It's a little messed up.
Right.
Yeah. I just want to be. Yeah. It's a time of great reflection. Embracing the prophetic, though, is still something I want to do with maturity and wisdom.
Yes.
It's a big deal.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, you can be a continuationist and not believe the prophetic history.
Right.
I think it was Some Said It Thundered was my first kind of induction into some of those stories, and it was like, wow, this is pretty amazing. Um, but then I guess living in Kansas City for that many years, I'm like, after a while, I'm like, this isn't the most important thing by any stretch of the imagination. It's
That's right.
the values, the Bible, the relationships, and loving one another.
Yeah.
Come on. Amen. Any kind of just thoughts that you have that we just kind of haven't touched on? Anything that you're just in reflection of this last year that you'd want to share?
Um, no, I didn't expect, you know, last October that we'd be in this position. I just encountered somebody from IHOP the other weekend. They ran up to me. They were like, of course, I don't live in Kansas City. They were like, "Are you part of the advocate group?" Which, of course, as you know, I don't like that term. And so I'm like, well, I'm one of the former leaders that's trying to help make sense out of this situation. And he's like, "Well, we need to apologize to you." He's like, "Do you believe the allegations against Mike Bickle?" And I was like, "I do." And I used some shocking words with him. You know, I said, "I do now believe Mike is a sexual predator and a pathological liar. And that's a sad state of affairs."
Yeah.
He's also incredibly charismatic. So he's talking to people now about a new vision, as he always does. And, oh, I'll be friends with Dwayne and Jono. I'm like, it's not a big deal. And yet we know behind the scenes, talking to the victims, how much devastation that he has caused.
Yes.
And I pray for the healing for the victims, and I wish there would be some break in to Mike, even for redemption for his life. I don't see it at the moment. I think I'm at the point of handing him over to Satan. That's the point I'll be. But keep this in mind, that handing someone over to Satan in the New Testament is for the salvation of their soul.
Right.
That's right.
I hope that Mike's soul is saved. And if something else can come about and he can actually repent, I mean, I think a bunch of people said that's a pipe dream. I don't think nothing is impossible with the Lord. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah, amen, man. Well, I just want to say, Jono, I'm incredibly grateful for what you've done this last year, you know, and I've seen you like hundreds of hours and your skill set, your communication, and I'm just very, very grateful for you.
Yes.
And then I also just want to say thank you even for your posture in our conversation here, but I've also seen a true, like a reflectiveness. And even, you know, we just, recent conversation you and I had when you were over a breakfast, and just, there was that reflection on, I need to just ask myself. And I think that's a model that we all need to be doing in this season, you know, and we've all aware God is highlighting sin within the church, and those leaders that are not reflective and walking with humility, that's actually scary to me. But I've seen you doing that, and I'm just super grateful for that. Your leadership in this whole thing, and then also just how you postured yourself. So, yeah, man. Any closing thoughts, beautiful wife?
Thanks, Dwayne. I think you're awesome, Jono, and your wife is pretty epic.
No,
yes. Where would we be?
Yeah.
Oh, 100%. I've always always enjoyed both of your perspective, because it's very different from mine on lots of topics. But Sherry's like both of you, when you guys, you know, even when Sherry was real hands-on in the media world, you guys always had just different thoughts. I've always loved it.
It's always stimulating conversation, for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting conversation. Yeah, 100%. 100%.
We need we need those to keep us accountable. So,
We appreciate your time, Jono.
Yeah,
Thank you so
thanks,
much.
Jono. Thank you, bro. And
Thanks.
much grace to y'all. And we'll see you guys on the next episode.